Hi, I'm Evelyn Hargrove. I found out my sister wore my wedding dress to my baby's military funeral, so I let my Army General husband deploy justice. My own flesh and blood stole my dress, my grief, even my dignity, pretending it was just honoring the moment. They exploited my most sacred loss, while I drowned in sorrow. Will you stay silent, or watch as we reclaim every shattered piece? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It was one of those gray autumn mornings where even the sun seemed hesitant to witness what was about to unfold. Malcolm was in his study on a classified call with his command team, his voice a controlled murmur that barely reached me through the thick oak door. I was sitting at our kitchen island, surrounded by framed photographs of our baby boy Carter, his tiny fingers and button nose frozen in time. 8 months of pure joy, before a rare congenital heart condition stole him away while Malcolm was deployed overseas. The kitchen counter was covered with sympathy cards, each one a paperweight pinning down my grief so it wouldn't float away and consume the whole house. I was sorting through the funeral arrangements, my fingers tracing the embossed lettering of our baby's name on the program. A military funeral for an infant. Malcolm's rank had afforded us this honor, though it felt strange to celebrate such a brief life with such formal ceremony. But then my phone lit up. Just a ping. A harmless chime I'd heard 1,000 times before. I didn't mean to look. I swear I didn't. But the screen was facing me, and something deeper than curiosity made me glance. Laurel, looking stunning in your dress. Perfect for tomorrow's service. You made the right choice letting her wear it. I blinked. The message preview was from my mother to someone named Funeral Committee. My stomach clenched. My first thought was, that must be a mistake. But the sender ID was clear, and the reference unmistakable. Laurel, my younger sister. My wedding dress, the exquisite Vera Wang I'd carefully preserved after my wedding to Malcolm 3 years ago, with plans to maybe someday show it to a daughter? A dress I hadn't offered to anyone, especially not for my son's funeral. I sat frozen for a beat. Then my hand moved on its own, reaching for my phone like it belonged to someone else. It wasn't curiosity. It was instinct. I opened my mother's messages and found myself stepping into a different universe. The thread wasn't just about the dress. It was a slow, meticulous planning of how tomorrow would unfold, with Laurel at the center, not me. The grieving aunt, so devoted she would wear white to honor her nephew's purity. So compassionate she would deliver the eulogy I had spent sleepless nights writing. So photogenic she would stand front and center with Malcolm, while I was relegated to, she might be too emotional to handle it. And then I saw the photo. Laurel in my wedding dress, standing before a mirror, one hand on her hip, the other holding her phone for the selfie. The dress I had worn when I promised forever to Malcolm. The dress that had been wrapped in acid-free tissue in a preservation box under our bed. The dress she must have taken when she came to help clean last week while I was sedated with grief and medication. There she was, head tilted, that practiced sympathetic smile on her perfect face, her blonde hair, so like mine but always more polished, cascading over the lace bodice I had chosen for its subtle beauty. I stared at the image for what felt like hours. I wasn't just looking at a stolen dress. I was looking at the theft of my motherhood, my grief, my moment to say goodbye to my child. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone across the room. I didn't scream, though God knows I wanted to. I placed the phone exactly where I found it. Then I walked, slow and steady, to the liquor cabinet. Poured a finger of Malcolm's expensive bourbon with hands that should have been shaking. They weren't. It's strange how betrayal at your most vulnerable doesn't hit like lightning. It seeps in like ice water, numbing before it burns. Once the bourbon touched my lips, I picked up my phone and texted Rachel. You awake? She replied in less than a minute. For you, always. Rachel, my best friend from college, the godmother of my baby, the one person who'd held my hand through 20 hours of labor and then again through the nightmare of pediatric CPR, the woman who had slept on my couch for 2 weeks after, making sure I ate, bathed, survived. They've taken my dress. They're planning to sideline me at my own baby's funeral, I said as soon as she picked up. I kept my voice steady. Clinical. What do you mean they? Her voice was instantly alert. My mother, my sister, the funeral committee they apparently formed. There was a pause. Then, I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there. I hung up and stood still in the center of the kitchen. The quiet tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the faint murmur of Malcolm's voice upstairs, it all seemed to echo in my suddenly hollow chest, like none of this could be happening. But it was. I turned off the kitchen light, walked back to the hallway. Malcolm was still on his call. Instead of interrupting him, I slipped into our bedroom, sat at my vanity, opened the journal Rachel had given me when we learned about Carter's condition, and on a fresh page, I wrote one sentence in thick black ink, then underlined it 3 times. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let's see what it feels like to bury my child while wearing dignity instead of white lace. I closed the journal, and this time my hands did shake, just a little. By the time Rachel arrived, Malcolm had emerged from his study, distracted and distant as he had been since rushing home from Afghanistan after Carter's death. He nodded at Rachel, squeezed my shoulder with a large hand that once made me feel safe, and retreated to the garage to check something on the car. His way of coping was to fix things, solve problems, stay busy. Meanwhile, I was the problem no one could fix. Rachel's auburn curls were wind-tossed, her green eyes fierce as she set a bottle of wine on the counter and pulled me into a hug that smelled of her signature sandalwood perfume. Show me, she said, no preamble necessary between us. I handed her my phone, open to the messages. She read in silence, her freckled face growing stonier with each swipe. When she reached the photo, she exhaled slowly through her nose, the way she did when restraining herself from violence. Evelyn, she said, finally, looking up. You need to tell Malcolm. I shook my head. He's barely holding it together. If I tell him this, he'll... What? Defend his wife? Stand up for you? Is that so terrible? I stared out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn of our Virginia home, at the oak tree where Malcolm had promised to hang a swing for Carter. His grief is different, I said quietly. He's a general. He has to be in control. Rachel set the phone down like it was contaminated. And you? Don't you deserve control of your own child's funeral? That word, deserve, hit like a slap. What did I deserve? Did I deserve to lose my baby? Did I deserve a sister who had always seen me as competition rather than family? Did I deserve the hollow shell my marriage had become in the wake of our loss? I need to think, I said, pouring us each a glass of wine. The funeral is tomorrow. Making a scene won't bring Carter back. Rachel watched me carefully. No, but neither will letting them erase you from your own story. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of tomorrow pressing down like a physical thing. What would you do? I asked finally. Rachel took a sip of her wine, considering. I'd find that dress. Tonight. The idea was so simple, so obvious, I almost laughed. Of course. The dress. My dress. If Laurel didn't have it, she couldn't wear it. She's staying at my parents' house, I said, mind racing now. They're probably at the rehearsal dinner for the funeral. The absurdity of that phrase, rehearsal dinner for a funeral, didn't escape me. Then we have time. Rachel stood, a familiar determination in her stance, the same determination that had gotten us through finals week, through my grueling residency as a pediatrician, through the early weeks of Carter's diagnosis when hope was still possible. You're suggesting we break into my parents' house? The old Evelyn, pre-loss Evelyn, would have been scandalized. Current Evelyn felt a flicker of something almost like excitement. Not break in. You have a key, remember? We're just retrieving stolen property. An hour later, we pulled up to my parents' sprawling colonial in Richmond's West End, the house where I'd grown up competing with Laurel for every scrap of attention, every word of praise. The place was dark except for the porch light, a promising sign that they were indeed at the rehearsal. My hand trembled slightly as I inserted the key. The familiar smell hit me as we entered. My mother's vanilla candles, furniture polish, and that indefinable scent of childhood, both comforting and suffocating. Where would she keep it? Rachel whispered. though we knew the house was empty. Guest room, probably. My old room. We climbed the stairs in silence, the plush carpet muffling our steps. My old bedroom had long ago been converted to a guest room, all traces of my existence carefully decorated away. Only a single framed photo remained, me in my white coat, at medical school graduation. Laurel, however, still had her childhood room preserved like a shrine, complete with cheerleading trophies and prom queen tiara displayed prominently. The guest room closet yielded nothing, nor did the dresser drawers. My heart sank. What if she had it elsewhere? What if Evelyn? Rachel's voice came from Laurel's room across the hall. Found it. There it was, hanging on the outside of Laurel's closet door, like a trophy. My wedding dress. The delicate beading along the neckline caught the light as Rachel carefully lifted it from the hanger. Check for damage, I said, voice tight. Rachel examined it carefully. It looks intact. She probably just tried it on for the photo. As Rachel carefully folded the dress over her arm, a cream-colored note card fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, recognized my mother's elegant handwriting. Laurel, darling, you'll look angelic tomorrow. The photographers are confirmed for 10 a.m. Remember, stand to Malcolm's right for the best angle. Evelyn will be seated with the immediate family, but you'll be the one they remember in the photos. Something cold and hard crystallized in my chest. This wasn't just about a dress. This was about visibility, about who would be the face of this grief, about whose pain would be memorialized. Take a picture, Rachel said, nodding at the note. I did, then replaced it exactly where it had fallen. As we turned to leave, my eyes caught on something else, a folder on Laurel's perfectly made bed labeled Eulogy. My hands moved before my brain could catch up. Inside were the words I had written for my son, printed out from the email I'd sent my mother for safekeeping. But there were edits. Laurel's flowing script changing my son to my nephew, your daddy and I to your parents. Personal anecdotes crossed out and replaced with generic platitudes. She was literally erasing me from my own words to my dead child. This time, I did cry. Silent, burning tears that Rachel pretended not to notice as she photographed the edited eulogy, then gently guided me from the room, the dress draped carefully over her arm like a wounded soldier. Back in the car, I sat staring at the house where I'd grown up, always feeling second best. Always the serious one, the responsible one, while Laurel charmed and dazzled. Always the one who achieved quietly while Laurel made spectacles of mediocrity. What now? Rachel asked, turning the key in the ignition. I took a deep breath. Now we go home. I'm gonna show Malcolm everything. And tomorrow, I looked down at my hands, steady now with purpose. Tomorrow I bury my son, wearing what I choose, saying the words I wrote, standing where a mother should stand. When we arrived home, Malcolm's car was gone, probably getting that drink with his XO he'd mentioned earlier. I hung my dress carefully in our closet, smoothing a hand over the fabric that had witnessed one beginning and would now witness an end. Rachel stayed until almost midnight, helping me rewrite my eulogy from memory, her quiet strength a counterbalance to my growing resolve. When she finally left, she hugged me fiercely and whispered, "They don't get to steal this from you. Not your grief, not your goodbye." Alone in the silent house, I opened my laptop and found myself staring at my sister's Instagram. There it was, a post from just hours ago, a selfie taken in the church where tomorrow's service would be held. The caption, "Final preparations for saying goodbye to my angel nephew. God has called me to be strong for my family tomorrow. #Angelant. #supporting my broken sister." The post had hundreds of likes already, comments praising her strength, her beauty, her selflessness. My phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. "With James. Back soon. Try to sleep." I didn't respond. Instead, I found myself pulling out the memory box I'd carefully curated during Carter's brief life. His hospital bracelet. The tiny hat he'd worn home from the hospital. A lock of downy hair from his first haircut. The sonogram picture where we'd first seen his perfect profile. I laid them out on our bed, these fragments of a life barely begun. Then I took out my phone and, for the first time since Carter's death, I opened my own long-neglected Instagram account. I arranged the mementos in a circle, placed my wedding ring in the center, and took a photo. No filters, no staged lighting, just raw evidence of love and loss. I captioned it simply, "These hands will carry you tomorrow, my son. No one else's." Then I turned off my phone, put away the memory box, and sat in the nursery rocking chair until dawn, rehearsing not just what I would say tomorrow, but how I would stand, how I would breathe through the weight of it all. Let's see what it feels like, I thought, to bury my child while wearing dignity instead of white lace. Let's see what it feels like to sit next to betrayal and not flinch. The morning of the funeral arrived with a stillness that felt manufactured. The house held its breath as I slipped into a simple black dress. Not the traditional military spouse attire, but my choice. My wedding dress hung in the closet where it belonged, a silent witness to the promise I'd made to honor both my marriage and my child. Malcolm emerged from the shower, his uniform impeccable, stars gleaming on his shoulders. He'd been distant since returning from deployment, grief carving new lines into his once familiar face. In the harsh morning light, he looked like a stranger wearing my husband's skin. "You're wearing black," he observed, voice neutral as he adjusted his cuffs. "Yes," I said. "I'm a mother burying her child, not a bride." Something flickered across his face. Confusion, perhaps. He'd been so wrapped up in his own pain, in the logistics of commands transferred and missions paused, that he'd barely participated in the funeral planning. That had left the door open for my mother and sister to step in, to take control. "Your mother mentioned," he began. "My mother doesn't decide how I say goodbye to our son," I interrupted, voice steady. "Neither does Laurel." Malcolm's shoulders stiffened at my tone. The general, unused to being challenged. "Evelyn, today isn't about making statements." "No," I agreed, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "It's about our son, our loss, not a photo opportunity for my sister." I held out my phone, open to the messages and photos Rachel and I had discovered. Malcolm took it, scrolled slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something darker, more dangerous. "What the hell is this?" he asked finally, the carefully controlled voice he used when fury lurked beneath. "My sister. Planning to wear my wedding dress to our son's funeral. Planning to read my eulogy. Planning to stand beside you while I'm seated with family, as if I'm not his mother. As if I'm just another mourner." Malcolm set the phone down with deliberate care. When he turned to me, I glimpsed the man who commanded thousands, who made decisions that altered the course of nations. "This won't happen," he said simply. For the first time since Carter's death, we were truly looking at each other, seeing each other's pain instead of just drowning in our own. "I've handled it," I said. "But I thought you should know before we arrive." He nodded once, military precision in the gesture. "Thank you for telling me." A pause then. "Evelyn, I'm sorry I haven't been present." The apology, unexpected and raw, cracked something in my chest. But this wasn't the time to address our fracturing marriage. Today was about Carter. "We should go," I said. "Rachel will meet us there." The drive to Arlington National Cemetery was silent, the late October sun breaking through clouds in weak, watery beams. Malcolm drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the console between us. After a moment's hesitation, I placed my hand over his. He turned his palm up, our fingers interlacing. The first real connection we'd shared in weeks. Arlington stretched before us, endless rows of white markers standing at attention like the soldiers they memorialized. Though Carter had never served, Malcolm's position entitled our son to this hallowed ground. A mixed blessing that meant my baby would rest among heroes, but far from our home. We parked in the designated area, and immediately I spotted my parents' car. My stomach tightened. Malcolm must have sensed my tension, because he squeezed my hand before releasing it. "I'm right beside you," he said, "where I should have been all along." The small chapel near the administration building was already filling with people. Malcolm's colleagues in their dress uniforms, my fellow doctors from the pediatric oncology ward, friends who had supported us through Carter's illness. Near the front, my mother stood directing people to seats, elegant in navy blue, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, and beside her, Laurel, not in my wedding dress, thankfully, but in a white dress that echoed its style. Fitted bodice, flowing skirt, delicate lace overlay. White, at a funeral. White, like she was the principal mourner. White, like she was making a statement about purity and angels and all the clichés people spout when they can't face the brutal reality of a child's death. Her blonde hair was arranged in the same style I'd worn at my wedding, her makeup subtle but flawless. She was speaking to the photographer, gesturing to the front row. Malcolm's hand found the small of my back, steadying me. I took a deep breath and moved forward. My mother spotted us first. Her smile faltered slightly at my simple black dress, at Malcolm's protective stance beside me. "Evelyn, darling," she said, air kissing my cheek. "We saved you a seat right here." She gestured to the second row, slightly off-center. "I'll be sitting with my husband in the front row, Mother," I said quietly, "with Carter's photos." My mother's smile tightened. "But we've already arranged." "Nothing," Malcolm interrupted, his voice carrying just enough authority to make heads turn. "You've arranged nothing, Mrs. Blackwood. This is our son's funeral." Laurel stepped forward then, one manicured hand touching Malcolm's arm familiarly. "Malcolm, we were just trying to help. Evelyn's been so fragile." The look Malcolm gave her would have withered a lesser opponent. He removed her hand from his arm like it was a distasteful object. "The only thing fragile here, Laurel, is your understanding of boundaries," he said, each word precise as a surgical cut. "You will not be reading the eulogy. You will not be standing with me. And you will take your seat with the extended family, which is what you are." Laurel's perfect composure cracked. "But the dress is inappropriate," I finished for her, "as is your attempt to center yourself in our grief." My father appeared then, uncomfortable in his dark suit, confusion evident as he took in the tableau of tension. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. My mother touched his arm. "Just a misunderstanding about the seating, Richard. It's fine." It wasn't fine, and everyone knew it. But this wasn't the time or place for the full reckoning that would eventually come. The chaplain was approaching, the small white casket visible through the chapel doors, surrounded by an honor guard. Malcolm nodded to them, then turned to me. "Ready?" I wasn't. I would never be ready to bury my child. But I nodded anyway. What followed was both a blur and painfully precise in my memory. The chaplain's words about innocence and God's plan that I endured rather than embraced. The small flags presented with military precision. The honor guards' solemn faces as they carried a casket far too small for their usual burdens. When it came time for the eulogy, I rose steady-legged and walked to the podium. From the corner of my eye, I saw Laurel shift forward, as if to object, but my mother's hand on her arm stopped her. I placed my handwritten pages on the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, some genuinely grieving, some performatively sad, some merely professionally present, and then set the pages aside. "Carter James Hargrove lived for 8 months and 14 days, I began, my voice clear in the hushed chapel. "Too brief for a career, for accolades, for achievements that the world measures, but long enough to love, long enough to be loved, long enough to change his father and me forever." I spoke about Carter's dimpled smile, about his fascination with ceiling fans, about the way he'd grip my finger while nursing. I spoke about the moment we learned of his heart condition, about the surgeries and treatments, about the night Malcolm had FaceTimed from Afghanistan to sing their special song as Carter's eyelids grew heavy. "My son never spoke a word," I said, "but he taught me more about courage than 20 years of medical training. He taught his father, who has led men into battle, what true strength looks like." Throughout, I kept my eyes mostly on Malcolm, who sat ramrod straight, tears tracking silently down his face. This was our story, not the sanitized, appropriated version Laurel had planned to deliver, but the messy, beautiful truth of our brief time as parents. When I returned to my seat, Malcolm took my hand and pressed it to his lips. A gesture so intimate, so unlike his usual public restraint, that I nearly broke then. The remainder of the service passed in that strange funeral time warp, simultaneously endless and over too quickly. Then we were following the honor guard and the tiny casket to the gravesite, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet, the air crisp with the promise of the coming winter. As we approached the prepared grave, I noticed the headstone was already in place. Unusual, but perhaps expedited due to Malcolm's rank. But as we drew closer, I saw something was wrong. The name etched in the stone read, Carter James Blackwood, beloved nephew and son, forever our Angel Blackwood. My maiden name, not Hargrove. My step faltered. Malcolm, sensing my distress, followed my gaze to the headstone. His entire body went rigid. "What the hell is this?" he hissed to the funeral director, who looked confused and uncomfortable. "The specifications were submitted by the family," the man said, gesturing vaguely toward my parents and Laurel, who stood a few paces behind us. Malcolm's face darkened with a fury I'd never seen directed at civilians. "My son's name is Carter James Hargrove. Fix this, now." The funeral director stammered apologies, promised the stone would be replaced immediately, offered alternatives for today's service. But the damage was done. One final attempt to erase, not just me this time, but Malcolm too. To rewrite our son as part of their narrative, not ours. I turned to face my family, rage burning through the numbness that had protected me until now. "Why?" I asked my mother simply. She had the grace to look ashamed, at least. "It was an honest mistake, Evelyn." "With all the arrangements?" "Bullshit," Malcolm said, the profanity shocking from his usually disciplined mouth. "This was deliberate." Laurel stepped forward, her white dress gleaming obscenely against the somber backdrop of gravestones. "We were trying to honor him properly. You've both been so overwhelmed making odd choices." She glanced pointedly at my black dress. "We just wanted him to have a beautiful farewell." "He's not your son to farewell," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "He's not your photo opportunity. He's not your chance to play the grieving aunt. He's our child, our loss." People were staring now, Malcolm's colleagues, the honor guard, the cemetery staff. This was becoming exactly the scene I'd wanted to avoid. But some violations are too great to let pass. Malcolm must have reached the same conclusion. He stepped forward, every inch the commanding officer, despite the tears still drying on his face. "The service will proceed with the temporary marker," he announced to the funeral director. "The permanent stone will be replaced within 24 hours with the correct name, Hargrove. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now." No one moved. Not even my parents or Laurel, though Laurel's perfect features had contorted with something like hatred. The chaplain, sensing the tension, moved quickly to redirect attention to the burial itself. The honor guard resumed their positions. The tiny casket was lowered into the earth that seemed too cold, too final for my baby. I stepped forward and dropped a single white rose onto the casket. Malcolm did the same, then wrapped his arm around my shoulders, holding me up, or perhaps I was holding him. As the chaplain spoke the final words, a sharp autumn wind scattered leaves across the cemetery, red and gold, dancing over white markers in a riot of color against military precision. It seemed fitting somehow, nature's rebellion against orderliness, beauty disrupting solemnity. We accepted condolences in a daze afterward, a receiving line of grief. Malcolm's colleagues saluted him, clasped his hand firmly, embraced me with awkward sincerity. My colleagues hugged me, promised to cover my patients for as long as I needed, avoided platitudes. Rachel stood near the end of the line, her eyes swollen but fierce. She hugged me tightly, then Malcolm, whispering something in his ear that made him nod grimly. My parents and Laurel hovered uncertainly nearby. Protocol demanded they be part of this formal goodbye, but the chasm between us was now too wide, too public to ignore. Finally, as the crowd thinned, my father approached alone. He looked older than I remembered, diminished somehow. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I didn't know about the headstone. Or the dress. I should have paid more attention." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from him. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak. He glanced at Malcolm, who was speaking with his commanding officer a few yards away, then back to me. Your mother. She gets carried away sometimes. And Laurel encourages it. They don't mean harm. Intent isn't magic, Dad, I said tiredly. The harm is done regardless. He looked down at his polished shoes. Will you come to the house? There's food. People will expect. No, I interrupted. We won't be there. You can tell people whatever you want about why. He nodded, resignation in the slump of his shoulders, and walked away to rejoin my mother and sister, who were surrounded by a small cluster of sympathetic relatives. Malcolm returned to my side, his hand finding mine automatically now. Ready to go home? Home. The house that had become both sanctuary and prison these past weeks. The nursery with its unused crib. The quiet that would never again be broken by a baby's cry. Not yet, I said. I need a few more minutes. Understanding, he guided me to a nearby bench beneath a maple tree aflame with color. We sat in silence, watching as the cemetery staff began the final burial process, as the last attendees drifted toward their cars, as the day continued despite the hole in the world where our son had been. I failed him, Malcolm said suddenly, voice raw. I was halfway around the world when he needed me most. I turned to look at my husband, this powerful man reduced to his most essential humanity by grief. You were serving your country. He knew you loved him. And I failed you too, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Left you to face this alone. Left the door open for your family to... He gestured vaguely toward the gravesite, words failing. We both retreated, I acknowledged. You to your duty, me to my grief. Malcolm took my hand, his calloused fingers tracing the veins on my wrist. I don't want to retreat anymore, Evelyn. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even really a promise. But it was a beginning. A recognition that the distance between us wasn't just geographic, and that we both had a choice about what came next. Neither do I said. As we walked back to our car, I spotted Laurel standing alone by hers, still pristine and white despite the hours of the funeral. Our eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, I saw something unexpected in her expression. Not anger or defiance, but something like fear, as if she'd miscalculated badly and was only now realizing the consequences. I didn't approach her. Some breaches can't be mended with a graveside conversation. But I didn't look away either. I held her gaze until she dropped hers, sliding into her car with uncharacteristic awkwardness. Malcolm noticed the exchange. Your sister has made a serious error in judgment, he said, the strategist in him assessing the battlefield. She's underestimated you. She always has, I replied. It's why she works so hard to overshadow me. The drive home was silent but not empty. The space between us seemed to pulse with unspoken words, with grief shared rather than divided, with the first tentative breaths of whatever came next. At home, we moved through the familiar rooms like ghosts, until Malcolm stopped abruptly in the hallway outside the nursery. The door was closed, as it had been since the day Carter was rushed to the hospital for the last time. I want to go in, he said. I hesitated. I'd been in a few times, late at night when sleep eluded me. Had sat in the rocking chair holding Carter's blanket, breathing in the lingering scent of baby shampoo and the special laundry detergent for sensitive skin. Are you sure? I asked. Malcolm nodded, his jaw set in the determined expression I recognized from whenever he faced something difficult but necessary. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was exactly as we'd left it. The nautical-themed mobile hanging still above the empty crib, the changing table neatly stocked with diapers that would never be used, the bookshelf filled with stories that would never be read aloud. Malcolm moved the crib, gripping the rail with white-knuckled hands. His back was to me, but I could see the slight shake of his shoulders, hear the ragged edge of his breathing. I stepped beside him, not touching, just present. Together we looked down at the empty space where our son had slept. When I close my eyes, Malcolm said, voice barely above a whisper, I can still see him here. Still hear him. Me too, I admitted. Sometimes I wake up thinking I've heard him crying. Malcolm turned to me then, his face stripped of all its military impassivity, all its careful control. Just a father in pain, a husband reaching for connection. I don't know how to do this, Evelyn. I don't know how to live with this hole. I took his hand, placed it over my heart. Neither do I. But we figure it out one breath at a time. Together. He pulled me against him, and for the first time since Carter's death, we truly held each other. Not the careful, distant embraces of the past weeks, but the desperate clinging of two drowning people who finally found something solid in a churning sea. Later, we ordered takeout neither of us would eat much of, and sat on the living room floor surrounded by photo albums. We spoke Carter's name aloud, again and again. We remembered. We cried. We even, surprisingly, laughed once or twice at the happy memories. Near midnight, my phone lit up with a text from Rachel. Just checking in, you okay? I looked at Malcolm, who had fallen asleep on the couch, one of Carter's tiny socks still clutched in his hand. Despite everything, the grief, the betrayal, the uncertain future, I felt something like peace settle over me. Not okay, I texted back. But not alone either. That's something. Rachel's response came quickly. It's everything. Get some rest. Tomorrow we deal with your family. Tomorrow. There would be consequences, confrontations, choices to make about forgiveness and boundaries. The funeral was over, but the aftershocks would continue. I set the phone aside and curled up beside Malcolm on the couch, careful not to wake him. As sleep pulled me under, I thought again of the words I'd written in my journal. Let's see what it feels like to bury my child while wearing dignity instead of white lace. I had done that today, had stood in my truth, had refused to be erased or sidelined or diminished in my grief. It hadn't lessened the pain of losing Carter, but it had prevented the additional wound of losing myself in the process. Tomorrow we would begin the work of rebuilding our lives, our marriage, our boundaries. It wouldn't be easy, but today had shown me that even in my darkest hour, I was stronger than those who sought to diminish me. And that was something to hold on to in the long night ahead. Morning came with a gentle insistence of light through half-drawn curtains. I found myself still on the couch, Malcolm's solid warmth beside me, his breathing deep and even in sleep. For a disorienting moment, I forgot. Forgot the funeral, forgot the betrayal, forgot the hole in our lives where Carter should be. Then reality rushed back, and I closed my eyes against it. Malcolm stirred, his hand finding mine even before he was fully awake. This new connection between us, forged in the crucible of shared grief, felt both fragile and unbreakable. Coffee? He asked, voice rough with sleep. Such a normal question for such an abnormal time. I nodded, grateful for the mundane ritual. In the kitchen, Malcolm moved with military precision, grinding beans, heating water in the kettle rather than using the expensive coffee maker that had been a wedding gift from my parents. The irony didn't escape me. Even in this small act, he was choosing sides. My phone, abandoned on the coffee table overnight, buzzed with incoming messages. I ignored it, focusing instead on the comfort of routine, the ceramic mugs Malcolm set on the counter, the splash of cream, the curl of steam rising in the morning light. We sat at the kitchen island, silent but together in a way we hadn't been for months. Finally, Malcolm spoke. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. I tensed, waiting. Funerals often bring clarity, or delusion. I wasn't sure which direction this conversation would take. Your family, he continued, fingers tapping a steady rhythm against his mug, has been undermining you for years, haven't they? The question caught me off guard. Malcolm had always been politely distant with my family, maintaining the cordial relationship expected of a son-in-law, particularly one whose career demanded a certain social finesse. He'd never commented on the dynamics I'd grown up with, had never seemed to notice the subtle ways my mother elevated Laurel while minimizing me. Yes, I said simply. They have. Malcolm nodded, as if confirming a suspicion rather than learning something new. I should have seen it sooner. I'm trained to recognize patterns, to identify threats. But I missed this one because it wasn't aimed at me. It's different when you grow up with it, I said. You learn to accept it as normal. There's nothing normal about what they tried to do yesterday, he replied, an edge to his voice. Using our son's funeral as a stage for your sister's performance. Changing his name on the headstone. It was strategic, I finished for him. Calculated for maximum impact when I was at my most vulnerable. Malcolm looked at me with new respect, the tactician in him recognizing a fellow strategist. Exactly. And now we need to be equally strategic about our response. The word "are" settled something in me, a question I hadn't even known I was asking. Where did we stand, Malcolm and I? Not just in our grief, but in this new battlefield my family had created. What are you suggesting? I asked. Before he could answer, my phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. With a sigh, I retrieved it. 27 missed calls, 15 text messages, 10 emails. My mother, Evelyn, please call me. We need to talk about yesterday. My father, your mother is very upset. Call when you can. Laurel, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. I was just trying to help. But there were others, unexpected ones. My Aunt Judith, my father's sister, saw what happened at the service. Finally. Been waiting years for someone to stand up to your mother and sister. Call if you need reinforcements. My cousin Rebecca. That white dress was beyond. Mom told me what happened with the headstone too. WTF. Here if you need to talk. Dr. Harrison, my department chair. Evelyn, disturbing rumors circulating about yesterday. Want to offer support. Office door open when you're ready. And most surprisingly, a message from Malcolm's commanding officer's wife, Caroline. Evelyn, the strength you showed yesterday was remarkable. Malcolm is lucky to have you. Let's have coffee next week. No platitudes, just coffee. I handed the phone to Malcolm, watching as he scrolled through the messages, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculating. Interesting, he said finally. Your family is trying to control the narrative, but they're losing ground. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but he was right. For years, my mother and Laurel had shaped how our extended family and social circle viewed me as the serious, difficult daughter, the less charming sister, the one who needed guidance and management. But yesterday had cracked that carefully constructed image. What do we do? I asked. Malcolm set the phone down. First, we decide what we want. Not just regarding your family, but for ourselves. For our future. Our future. Another concept that had seemed impossible to consider in the fog of grief after Carter's death. But Malcolm was right. We needed direction, needed purpose beyond just surviving the next breath, the next day. I want to go back to work, I said, surprising myself with the certainty of it. Not right away, but soon. I need to be helping children again. Malcolm nodded. I've been offered a position at the Pentagon. Less travel, more strategic planning. I was going to turn it down, but now... You should take it, I said. The thought of Malcolm being stationed permanently nearby, of not facing the endless deployments that had marked our marriage, felt like the first piece of solid ground under my feet in months. And your family? He asked. I stared into my coffee, watching the light play across its surface. I need space from them, a lot of space, but I don't know what that looks like yet. Malcolm reached across the island and took my hand. Then we take it one step at a time, set boundaries, enforce them, see who respects them and who doesn't. It sounded so simple when he said it like that. A clear mission objective, a tactical plan. But families are messy, emotional battlegrounds where the rules of engagement are written in invisible ink and constantly changing. They'll push back, I warned. Hard. Let them, Malcolm said, and for the first time in days, I saw the ghost of a smile touch his lips. I've faced worse opposition with fewer resources. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. We both tensed, the fragile bubble of our morning communion threatened by the outside world's intrusion. Malcolm stood. I'll get it. Through the kitchen doorway, I watched him cross to the front door, back straight, shoulders set. The general even in sweatpants and yesterday's rumpled dress shirt. He opened the door without checking the peephole, confident in his ability to handle whatever waited on the other side. My mother stood on our porch, impeccably dressed as always in a dove-gray suit that somehow managed to suggest both mourning and importance. Behind her, my father hovered uncertainly, and beside him, unexpectedly, stood Laurel, no longer in white but in a subdued blue dress that screamed contrition. "Malcolm," my mother said, her voice carrying clearly to where I sat, "we need to speak with Evelyn." "She's not available," Malcolm replied, his tone polite but unyielding. My mother's practiced smile faltered. "This is a family matter." "Yes," Malcolm agreed, "and I'm her family." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. My mother looked genuinely taken aback, not by the words themselves, but by the clear implication that Malcolm was choosing sides, that the military alliance she had always counted on, the deference to her authority she had come to expect from her decorated son-in-law, had dissolved. "Perhaps we could come back later?" my father suggested, always the peacemaker. "That won't be necessary," I said, moving to stand beside Malcolm in the doorway. "If you have something to say, you can say it now." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly at my tone, but she quickly composed her features into an expression of maternal concern. "Darling, we're worried about you. Yesterday was unfortunate. Things were said in the heat of emotion that we should move past." "Unfortunate," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" Laurel stepped forward, hands clasped demurely before her. "Evelyn, I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to help when you were so overwhelmed. By wearing white to my son's funeral? By stealing my eulogy? By changing his name on the headstone?" Each question landed like a blow, making Laurel flinch despite her composed exterior. "The headstone was a miscommunication with the cemetery," my father interjected. "A simple error." "Nothing about yesterday was simple or an error," Malcolm said, his voice deceptively calm. It was a deliberate attempt to sideline Evelyn at her own child's funeral. My mother drew herself up, affronted. "That is an outrageous accusation. We were trying to support Evelyn, to take the burden off her shoulders when she's been so fragile." There it was again. That word. Fragile, the label they'd been attaching to me for years, the justification for every boundary crossed, every decision made on my behalf, every time Laurel was pushed forward while I was held back. "I am not fragile," I said, meeting my mother's gaze directly. "I am grieving. There's a difference." My mother's expression softened into something that might have passed for sympathy if I hadn't known better. "Of course you are, darling. That's why you need your family now more than ever." "What I need," I said carefully, "is respect for my boundaries, something you've consistently failed to provide." Laurel made a small, impatient noise. "You're being dramatic, Evelyn, as usual." And there it was, the mask slipping, revealing the contempt beneath the concern. Malcolm shifted beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. "I think we're done here." "We most certainly are not," my mother snapped, her carefully cultivated poise cracking. "Evelyn, you cannot shut us out. We're your family." "Family doesn't do what you did yesterday," I replied. "Family doesn't exploit grief for attention. Family doesn't try to erase a parent from their child's funeral." My father looked genuinely distressed now. "Evelyn, please. Your mother and sister have apologized. What more do you want?" The question hung in the air, unexpectedly profound. What did I want? Not just regarding yesterday's events, but from these relationships that had shaped and sometimes warped my entire life? "Space," I said finally. "I want space and time to grieve my son without having to manage your feelings or protect myself from your agendas." My mother's face hardened. "This is Malcolm's influence. He's isolating you." Malcolm laughed then, a short, incredulous sound. "I've been deployed for most of the past year, Mrs. Blackwood. If anyone has been influencing Evelyn, it's been you." "We should go," my father said, placing a restraining hand on my mother's arm. "This isn't helping anyone." For once, I agreed with him. This doorway confrontation wasn't going to resolve decades of dysfunction. "I'll call when I'm ready," I said, not specifying when that might be. It could be days, weeks, or months. I honestly didn't know. My mother looked like she wanted to argue further, But something in my expression or Malcolm's stance must have convinced her it would be futile. With a curt nod, she turned and walked back to their waiting car, spine rigid with indignation. My father hesitated, then stepped forward and awkwardly patted my shoulder. "We do love you, Evelyn." "In our way." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. His acknowledgement that their love came with qualifications, with a particular shape I was expected to fit, was both painful and validating. Laurel was the last to leave, lingering after our parents had already gotten into the car. For a moment, she looked younger, uncertain, reminiscent of the little sister who had once followed me around adoringly before our mother had taught her competition rather than connection. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said quietly. I studied her face, searching for sincerity beneath the practiced contrition. "Didn't you?" She flinched slightly. "You always had everything so together. The perfect career, the perfect husband, the perfect baby. And now I have a dead child," I said bluntly. "Is that balanced enough for you?" Tears filled her eyes. Real ones, not the photogenic tears she'd displayed at the funeral. "Evie, don't call me that," I interrupted. She had lost the right to my childhood nickname long ago. "Just go, Laurel." She opened her mouth as if to say more, then closed it again. With a small nod, she turned and walked to the car where our parents waited. I watched them drive away, feeling both hollow and somehow lighter, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. Malcolm closed the door gently, then turned to me. "You okay?" I considered the question, its complexity belied by its simplicity. Was I okay? My child was dead. My family was fractured, perhaps irreparably. My grief was a living thing inside me, with teeth and claws. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be eventually." Malcolm nodded, understanding that this was neither defeat nor despair, but reality, the first step toward whatever came next. The rest of the day passed in a strange, suspended calm. We showered, changed into clean clothes, forced ourselves to eat a proper meal. Malcolm made calls about the headstone, ensuring the correction would be completed as promised. I responded to some of the supportive messages, ignoring the ones from my immediate family. In the afternoon, a delivery arrived, a small potted tree from Rachel with a card that read simply, "For your garden." Something that grows. I placed it on the patio, this living memorial, and felt something shift inside me, not healing exactly, but possibility. As evening fell, Malcolm received a call from his commanding officer. I gave him privacy for the conversation, busying myself with clearing away our dinner dishes. When he returned to the kitchen, his expression was complicated. "Everything okay?" I asked. "They're still offering me the Pentagon position," he said, "but there's a complication." I waited, sensing there was more. "They've asked me to oversee a new initiative, a comprehensive review of support systems for military families who lose children. Apparently, our experience has highlighted some significant gaps. The irony wasn't lost on me, that our personal tragedy might lead to systemic change, that our pain might prevent others from facing the same institutional coldness we had encountered. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "That I needed to discuss it with you," Malcolm replied. "It would mean being more public about Carter, about what we've been through. I won't do that if you're not comfortable with it." I leaned against the counter, considering. Part of me wanted to protect our grief, to keep Carter's memory private and sacred, but another part recognized the power in purpose, in channeling pain toward prevention. "I think we should do it," I said finally. "But on our terms. No exploitation, no performative grief. Real change." Malcolm nodded, relief evident in the softening of his features. "That's what I hoped you'd say." Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself in Carter's nursery again. This time, instead of just sitting in the rocking chair clutching his blanket, I began to really look at the room, at the books we'd collected, the toys still waiting to be played with, the tiny clothes folded in the dresser drawers. An idea began to form, nebulous at first, then gaining clarity as I moved around the room, touching these fragments of the life we'd planned. When Malcolm found me there an hour later, I was surrounded by sorted piles, clothes in one, books in another, toys in a third. "Evelyn?" His voice was concerned, uncertain. I looked up at him, seeing the fear in his eyes, that this was some manic episode, some unhealthy purging born of desperation. "I'm not getting rid of everything," I assured him quickly. "Just repurposing." He knelt beside me, examining the careful piles. "Tell me." "The clothes," I said, touching the stack of tiny sleepers and onesies, "could go to the NICU at my hospital, the books to the pediatric ward. The toys." I hesitated. "Maybe we keep those. For now." Malcolm's hand covered mine. "For now," he agreed. Neither of us ready to voice the question of whether there might someday be another child in our lives. Another chance at parenthood. "And I was thinking about the Pentagon project," I continued. "What if we created a foundation in Carter's name? Something to support military families dealing with infant and child loss?" The words came faster now, the idea taking shape as I spoke it aloud. "We could provide specialized grief counseling, financial support for funerals, connection to resources. All the things we had to figure out on our own." Malcolm was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the nursery. Then he reached out and pulled me against him, his embrace fierce and protective. "Carter James Hargrove Foundation," he said against my hair. "It sounds right." I nodded against his chest. Tears coming now, but different from the tears of yesterday. Not just grief, but purpose. Not just loss, but legacy. We stayed that way for a long time, holding each other in the room that would never be what we'd intended but might still be something meaningful. Eventually, we gathered the sorted items and returned to our bedroom. For the first time since Carter's death, we slept in our bed rather than apart or on the couch. Malcolm's arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder, our breathing synchronized in the darkness. Morning came again, as it persistently does even after the worst days of our lives. I woke to find Malcolm already up, the smell of coffee once again filling the house. But this time, when I entered the kitchen, I found him at the table with his laptop open, making notes on a legal pad. "Morning," he said, looking up with the ghost of a smile. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been doing some research on establishing a foundation." I poured myself coffee and joined him at the table. "Show me." For the next hour, we immersed ourselves in practicalities, legal requirements, mission statements, board structures. It wasn't a cure for our grief, but it was a channel for it, a way to move with it, rather than drowning in it. My phone rang around noon. "Rachel, checking in." I put her on speaker so Malcolm could hear too. "How are you holding up?" she asked without preamble. "One breath at a time," I answered honestly. "But we're planning something." I explained about the foundation, about Malcolm's Pentagon project, about our vision for supporting other families like ours. Rachel was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then, "You know this is going to drive your mother and Laurel absolutely insane, right? You taking center stage in something they can't control?" I hadn't actually considered that aspect, but she was right. My family had always been uncomfortable when I stepped into any spotlight, had always found ways to redirect attention back to Laurel's achievements or my mother's social standing. "That's not why we're doing it," I said. "Of course not," Rachel agreed. "But it's a lovely side effect." After we hung up, I looked at Malcolm. "Is she right? Are we setting ourselves up for more drama with my family?" Malcolm considered the question seriously. "Probably, but we can't let that dictate our choices anymore. This is about Carter, about his legacy, about helping others. If your family can't respect that, it says more about them than about us." He was right, of course. For too long, I'd shaped my life around avoiding conflict with my mother and Laurel, around accommodating their need to be central, around diminishing myself to keep peace. No more. That afternoon, we drove to Arlington to see the corrected headstone. It was a somber pilgrimage, but necessary, to see with our own eyes that this one thing, at least, had been set right. Carter James Hargrove, beloved son forever in our hearts, The simplicity of it, the rightness, brought fresh tears. But as we stood hand in hand before our son's final resting place, I felt something settle in me. Not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement. This had happened. This was real. This was now part of our story. "We should plant something here," Malcolm said unexpectedly. "Something that blooms year after year." I thought of the small tree Rachel had sent, waiting on our patio. "Maybe a magnolia," I suggested. "They're strong. Resilient." "Like their mother," Malcolm said softly. We stayed until sunset, talking quietly to Carter, to each other, planning the foundation that would bear his name, the life we would build in the shadow of his absence. As we walked back to the car, I spotted a familiar figure near the cemetery entrance, my father, alone, standing uncertainly by his car as if gathering courage. Malcolm noticed him too, his hand tightening around mine. "Do you want to leave?" I considered it. It would be easier, certainly, to avoid another confrontation, another emotional tangle. But something told me this visit was different. "No," I decided. "Let's see what he wants." As we approached, my father straightened, removing his hat. He looked older in the fading light, the weight of years and choices visible in the slump of his shoulders. "Evelyn, Malcolm," he said with a nod. "I hoped I might find you here." "Dad," I acknowledged, not moving to embrace him, not yet sure why he had come. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to see the headstone, to make sure it was right." I studied him, searching for the hidden agenda, the manipulation that usually lurked beneath my family's actions. But he seemed genuine, his discomfort real rather than performed. "It's been corrected," Malcolm confirmed, his tone neutral. My father nodded. "Good, that's good." He hesitated, then added, "I brought something for you, or rather, for Carter." From the passenger seat of his car, he retrieved a small, weathered wooden box. I recognized it immediately. My grandfather's old fishing tackle box, the one my father had taught me to fish with during those rare one-on-one outings of my childhood. "I thought maybe," my father said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain, "we could leave this with him. He would have been old enough for fishing lessons in a few years." The simple acknowledgement of the future we'd lost, the quiet recognition of Carter as a person with a life that should have unfolded, undid me. I felt tears rise again, saw them mirrored in my father's eyes. "That would be nice," I managed. Together, the three of us walked back to the gravesite. My father placed the tackle box carefully at the base of the headstone, his hand lingering on the polished stone. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he said quietly. "For yesterday. For all the yesterdays when I didn't stand up for you. For letting your mother and sister." He trailed off, words failing him. I didn't rush to absolve him. These were wounds too deep for easy forgiveness, patterns too ingrained for simple resolution. "Thank you for coming today," I said instead, "and for remembering Carter as he deserved to be remembered. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A small bridge across a wide chasm, a tentative step toward whatever our relationship might become now." As we walked my father back to his car, he mentioned casually, "Your mother doesn't know I'm here." For the first time in days, I felt the ghost of a smile touch my lips. "Our secret, then." He nodded, relief evident in his face. "I'd like to hear about this foundation you're planning, when you're ready to share." Malcolm and I exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between us. "We'll call you," Malcolm said, extending his hand to my father. As we watched him drive away, I leaned against Malcolm, suddenly exhausted by the emotional terrain we'd navigated. "One step at a time," Malcolm reminded me, echoing our morning's resolution. "One step at a time. Toward healing, toward purpose, toward the life we would build now. Different from the one we'd planned, marked forever by loss, but still ours to shape." 3 months passed like the slow turning of heavy pages. Winter settled over Arlington, dusting Carter's headstone with snow that Malcolm carefully brushed away during our weekly visits. The magnolia we'd planted, just a sapling now, stood wrapped in burlap against the cold, a promise of spring's eventual return. In those months, We moved forward inch by painful inch. Malcolm accepted the Pentagon position and threw himself into developing the Military Family Bereavement Initiative. I returned to my pediatric practice part-time, finding solace in the ability to help other children, even as I carried the weight of not having been able to save my own. The Carter James Hargrove Foundation took shape, first as notes on legal pads, then as formal documents, finally as an entity with a board of directors that included Rachel, Malcolm's commanding officer, and surprisingly, my father. My mother and Laurel had not been invited to participate, a deliberate omission that went unremarked upon, but hung in the air during the stilted holiday dinner we'd attended, out of a complex mixture of obligation and tentative reconciliation. In January, the foundation received its first major donation, a substantial sum from an anonymous military family who had lost their daughter to the same congenital heart condition that had taken Carter. The accompanying note said simply, "You made us feel less alone. Thank you." I kept that note on my desk, a tangible reminder that our pain could be transformed into purpose, that Carter's brief life could still create ripples of compassion in the world. Malcolm and I had settled into a new rhythm, not the carefree partnership of our early marriage, nor the strained distance of the months after Carter's death, but something tempered and tested, a bond forged in fire and somehow stronger for the burning. Then came the envelope that would shift our axis once again. It arrived on a Tuesday in late February. Official Pentagon letterhead stark against the pile of Foundation correspondence and medical journals. Malcolm opened it while we ate dinner, his expression shifting from curiosity to something more complex as he read. "What is it?" I asked, setting down my fork. He handed me the letter without comment. A deployment order, not to a combat zone this time, but to Germany. A 6-month assignment to implement the family bereavement protocols he'd helped develop across European military bases. "When?" I asked, the single word containing multitudes. "April," he replied. 8 weeks from now. I nodded, processing. 6 months apart after we'd only just found our way back to each other. 6 months of sleeping alone in our bed, of speaking through screens rather than touch, of navigating my family and the foundation without his steady presence. "What are you thinking?" Malcolm asked, watching me carefully. I considered the question, examining my own reaction with the clinical detachment that had served me well as a doctor. There was apprehension, yes, but not the panic I might have expected, not the dread that had accompanied his previous deployments. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that we can handle this. That we're stronger now than we were before." Relief softened Malcolm's features. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." We discussed logistics, how we'd manage the foundation in his absence, how often we could video call given the time difference, whether I would continue living in our house or temporarily move closer to the hospital during his deployment. What we didn't discuss, at least not that night, was the other letter that had arrived that morning, the one I'd hidden in my desk drawer, unable to process its implications alongside our daily life. The next day, while Malcolm was at the Pentagon, I took the second letter to Rachel's apartment. She opened the door in paint-splattered overalls, her latest artistic phase in full swing. "This better be important," she said, gesturing me inside. "I was just getting to the good part with this canvas. Malcolm's being deployed to Germany," I said, settling onto her paint-flecked couch. 6 months, starting in April. Rachel set her paintbrush down, giving me her full attention. "How are you feeling about that?" "Surprisingly okay," I admitted. "But there's something else." I handed her the letter I'd been carrying like a live grenade. Rachel wiped her hands on her overalls before taking it, eyes widening as she read. "Evelyn," she breathed. "This is..." I know. The letter was from the fertility clinic, where Malcolm and I had frozen embryos before his last deployment, a precaution against the uncertainties of war, a hope for siblings for Carter someday. Embryos created before we knew about Carter's heart condition, before we understood the genetic lottery we'd unwittingly entered. The clinic was relocating and needed instructions regarding our stored embryos. Transfer to another facility, continue storage at their new location, or other options. "Have you told Malcolm?" Rachel asked, carefully refolding the letter. I shook my head. Not yet. I don't know what to say, what to think. Rachel was silent for a moment, contemplating. What are you afraid of? The question cut through my circular thoughts, forcing me to confront the heart of my hesitation. That wanting another child means I'm replacing Carter, I said finally. That risking another pregnancy means risking the same heartbreak. That Malcolm will say no. That Malcolm will say yes. Rachel nodded, understanding the contradictions. All valid fears. But none of them are reasons not to have the conversation. She was right, of course. Malcolm deserved to know, deserved a voice in this decision that would shape whatever came next for us. How do I even start that conversation? I asked. Rachel squeezed my hand. Honestly, the way you two have been approaching everything else lately. That night, after Malcolm returned from the Pentagon, we sat in our backyard despite the February chill, wrapped in blankets, a small fire pit casting dancing light across our faces. I handed him the letter without preamble, watching as he read it once, then again. I wasn't sure how to bring this up, I said when he finally looked up at me. Malcolm set the letter aside carefully. I've been thinking about them, he admitted. The embryos. Not constantly, but they're there in the back of my mind. I hadn't expected that. Had assumed this was a possibility he'd shut away after Carter's death, a door firmly closed. What are you thinking? I asked, echoing his question from the night before. Malcolm stared into the fire, gathering his thoughts. I'm thinking that we created those embryos out of love and hope. That losing Carter was the worst pain I've ever experienced, but loving him was the greatest joy. He looked up at me then, his eyes reflecting the flames. I'm thinking I don't want fear to make this decision for us. His words resonated with something shifting inside me, a tentative unfurling of possibility I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. The genetic counselor said it was a spontaneous mutation, I said quietly. That the odds of it happening again are low. But not zero. Malcolm nodded. Nothing in life is zero risk. You know that better than anyone. It was true. As a pediatrician, I'd seen the random cruelty of chance, the unpredictable nature of life and death. I'd also seen remarkable resilience, astonishing recoveries, the human capacity to find joy even in the hardest circumstances. I'm scared, I admitted. Terrified, actually. Me too, Malcolm said simply, but I'm also scared of letting fear make our choices. Of missing out on loving another child because we're afraid of losing them too. I reached for his hand across the space between our chairs. What about your deployment? The timing. Not ideal, he acknowledged, but when is timing ever perfect? Life doesn't wait for convenient moments. We sat in silence for a while, watching the fire, holding hands, each lost in our own thoughts yet somehow together in them too. We don't have to decide tonight, Malcolm said finally. We have a few weeks before I leave, months before any real steps would need to be taken. I nodded, grateful for the breathing room. I'd want to do more genetic testing first. Make sure we understand all the risks. Agreed, Malcolm said, and I'd want us both to be completely certain. No reservations, no pressure. Another silence, comfortable this time. The first stars appeared above us, pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. Whatever we decide, I said softly, Carter will always be our firstborn. Our son. Nothing changes that. Malcolm's grip on my hand tightened. Nothing ever could. Over the next 6 weeks, we moved forward on parallel tracks, preparing for Malcolm's deployment, continuing our work with the Foundation, and quietly researching the medical and emotional implications of potentially using our frozen embryos. We spoke with genetic counselors, with therapists specializing in grief and family planning, with other couples who had lost children and chosen to have more. Each conversation was both painful and illuminating, each decision point carefully considered. Meanwhile, life continued its relentless forward motion. The Foundation hosted its first formal event, a weekend retreat for military families who had lost children, held at a peaceful resort in the Virginia countryside. 20 families attended, each carrying their own story of loss, each finding unexpected connection and shared grief. I watched Malcolm during that weekend, saw how he moved among these broken-hearted parents with quiet strength and authentic empathy, saw how they responded to him not as General Hargrove with his medals and authority, but as Malcolm who understood their pain because he lived it too. On the last evening of the retreat, as families gathered around a bonfire sharing memories of their children, Malcolm stood and spoke about Carter, about his smile, his fascination with ceiling fans, his perfect tiny fingers, about how losing him had nearly destroyed us but ultimately forced us to build something stronger from the ruins. Grief doesn't end, he told the circle of firelit faces. It changes. It becomes part of you, woven into the fabric of who you are. Our children change us by their living, and they change us by their dying. The challenge is to make that change something meaningful. Later that night, as we lay in our hotel room listening to the distant sounds of the resort settling into sleep, Malcolm turned to me in the darkness. "I want to try," he said simply. "With the embryos. If you do." I took a deep breath, searching myself for hesitation, for doubt. I found fear, yes. That would never fully disappear. But beneath it, stronger than I'd expected, was hope. "I do," I whispered. "I want to try." The decision made, we entered a strange period of suspended action. There would be no concrete steps until after Malcolm's return from Germany. The embryos would remain safely stored until then, potential and promise held in frozen stasis. In the weeks before his departure, we threw ourselves into preparation, both practical and emotional. Malcolm briefed me thoroughly on every aspect of the Foundation's operations. I arranged my work schedule to accommodate his absence. Together, we prepared our home, our finances, our expectations for 6 months apart. What we didn't prepare for was my mother's unexpected visit 3 days before Malcolm's departure. She arrived unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, immaculately dressed as always, her silver hair swept into its perfect chignon. I answered the door with dish soap still in my hands, caught in the middle of the meal prep I was doing to stock our freezer before Malcolm left. "Mother," I said, surprised. "We weren't expecting you." She offered her cheek for the obligatory kiss. "I was in the neighborhood. May I come in?" I stepped aside, drying my hands on a dish towel as she entered, her critical gaze sweeping our home as it always did, cataloging imperfections. "Malcolm's deploying again, I hear," she said, settling herself on our couch without waiting for an invitation. "To Germany," I confirmed, "on Wednesday." She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "And how are you feeling about that?" The question caught me off guard, not the words themselves, which were standard enough, but the tone. There seemed to be genuine concern beneath the polished exterior. "We've been through deployments before," I said carefully. "Not since Carter," she pointed out. The direct mention of my son's name from her lips was startling. Since the funeral, my mother had adopted the common approach of the deeply uncomfortable, avoiding any mention of Carter, as if speaking his name might conjure grief too potent to contain. "No," I acknowledged, "not since then." My mother smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her skirt. "I've come to apologize, Evelyn." Now I was truly shocked. In my entire life, I could count on one hand the times I'd heard my mother apologize for anything. "For what, specifically?" I asked, not making it easy for her. She met my gaze directly. "For the funeral. For allowing Laurel to overstep. For not recognizing what you needed in your grief." I sat down across from her, studying her face for the hidden agenda, the manipulative undercurrent that usually accompanied such overtures. "Why now?" I asked. My mother sighed, a small crack in her perfect composure. "Because I saw your Foundation's retreat on the news. Because your father speaks of nothing else lately. Because Laurel is in therapy, if you can believe it, working through her issues with competition." This last revelation was perhaps the most surprising. Laurel, who had always dismissed therapy as for weak people, was willingly examining her own behavior? "That's good for her," I said neutrally. "Yes," my mother agreed. "It is." She hesitated, then added, "It's made me examine some things as well. about how I raised you girls, about the dynamics I encouraged. I remained silent, waiting. This was territory we had never explicitly navigated, the unspoken current that had shaped our family for decades. I always saw so much of myself in you, my mother continued. Your seriousness, your intelligence, your determination. It scared me, I think. I didn't want you to make my mistakes. What mistakes? I asked, genuinely curious now. Putting achievement before connection, valuing respect over being liked. She smiled faintly. I pushed Laurel to be more social, more visible, because I thought that was what would make her successful. I let you focus on academics, on your career, because I thought you were like me, driven by accomplishment rather than affection. It was a startlingly insightful admission from a woman I'd always experienced as emotionally oblivious. And now? I prompted. Now I see that I was wrong to think either approach was superior, wrong to pit you against each other, however, unintentionally. She looked around our home, at the photos of Carter that still adorned our walls, at the foundation paperwork spread across our dining table. You've built something meaningful from unimaginable pain. That takes a strength I'm not sure I possess. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a willingness to consider it as a possibility. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. My mother nodded, accepting the limited response. I won't intrude on your time with Malcolm before he leaves. I just wanted you to know, I'm trying to do better. To be better. As she rose to leave, she hesitated, then reached into her purse and withdrew a small velvet box. I also wanted to give you this, she said, placing it on the coffee table between us. It belonged to my grandmother. I've always kept it in my safe deposit box, but it should be yours now. Curious, I opened the box to find an antique silver locket, oval-shaped and intricately engraved. Open it, my mother urged softly. Inside was a tiny photograph I didn't recognize. A solemn-faced baby, perhaps 6 months old, in an old-fashioned christening gown. Who is this? I asked. My brother, my mother replied, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. William. He died of pneumonia before his first birthday. My mother never really recovered. I stared at her, this revelation recontextualizing so much about the woman who had raised me. You never told me you had a brother. No, she agreed. In my family, we didn't speak of painful things. We moved forward, chin up, emotions contained. She touched the locket gently. I thought that was strength. Now I'm not so sure. I closed the locket carefully, this unexpected window into my mother's history, this possible explanation for her emotional distance, her fear of vulnerability. Thank you, I said, and meant it this time. She nodded, composure fully restored. I'll let you get back to your preparations. Call if you need anything while Malcolm is away. After she left, I sat holding the locket, turning it over in my hands, thinking about generational patterns, about the inheritance of grief and the choices we make in its aftermath. When Malcolm returned from his run, I showed him the locket and relayed the conversation. What do you think? He asked, always careful not to influence my feelings about my family. I think she's genuinely trying, I said slowly. I think understanding doesn't automatically equal forgiveness, but it's a start. Malcolm nodded, accepting this nuanced response. And the locket? I opened it again, studied the solemn baby face. An uncle I'd never known, a loss that had shaped my mother in ways I was only beginning to understand. I think I'll wear it, I decided. Not every day, but sometimes. As a reminder. Of what? Malcolm asked. That pain doesn't have to be a secret. That loss doesn't have to isolate us. That we have choices about how grief shapes us. Malcolm smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that had become more frequent lately. Carter would approve of that philosophy. Yes, I agreed. I think he would. The night before Malcolm's departure, we lay awake in our bed, neither willing to waste our remaining hours together in sleep. Outside, a spring rain tapped against the windows, a gentle percussion accompanying our whispered conversation. I've been thinking about names, Malcolm admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. Names? I echoed, though I knew exactly what he meant. For the embryos, if they become someone. I turned to face him in the darkness. That feels like tempting fate. Maybe, he acknowledged. Or maybe it's an act of faith. Faith had been complicated for both of us since Carter's death. The military chaplains had offered their standard comforts, my family had spoken of God's plan, but privately we had both struggled with the theological implications of our loss. "What names are you thinking?" I asked, curious despite my superstition. "Eleanor for a girl," he said softly, "after your grandmother." I smiled, touched by his choice. "And for a boy?" Malcolm was quiet for a moment. "Not Carter," he said finally. "No child should have to live in the shadow of a ghost." "No," I agreed. "Not Carter." "James, maybe," he suggested. "Carter's middle name. A connection, but not a replacement." "James." I let the name settle in my mind, testing its weight, its possibilities. "Eleanor or James," I whispered. "Maybe both, eventually." Malcolm's arms tightened around me. I liked the sound of that. We didn't sleep that night, keeping vigil against the approaching separation, against the uncertain future. We talked of practical things, the foundation, the house, my work schedule, and of deeper matters, our fears, our hopes, the people we were becoming through loss and love and choice. As dawn broke, painting our bedroom in soft gray light, Malcolm kissed me with a tenderness that spoke of all we had survived together. 6 months, he said. Not so long in the scope of a lifetime. No, I agreed, not so long. At the airport, we didn't indulge in dramatic goodbyes. Military couples learn early that partings require a certain stoicism, a faith in reunion that precludes excessive displays. "I'll call when I land," Malcolm promised, uniform crisp, posture military straight despite the emotion I could read in his eyes. "I'll be waiting," I assured him. One last embrace, one last kiss, and then he was walking through security, turning once to raise his hand in farewell before disappearing into the crowd of travelers. I didn't cry until I reached the car, and even then, the tears were different from the ones I'd shed after Carter's death. These were cleaner somehow, simpler, sadness without despair, missing without devastation. At home, I moved through the quiet rooms, adjusting to the absence that would define the next 6 months. On the kitchen counter, Malcolm had left a small wrapped package with a note, "Open when you need to remember." I set it aside, not ready yet to face whatever thoughtful gesture he'd prepared for my moments of weakness. Instead, I went to Carter's nursery, now transformed into a home office for foundation work, though we'd kept his rocking chair and a shelf of his favorite books. I sat in the chair, looking out at the spring rain nourishing our garden, at the new growth pushing through the soil. "Well, Carter," I said aloud, a habit I'd developed in these quiet moments. "Dad's off to Germany, and it's just you and me for a while. But we've got plans, little one. Big plans." I touched my abdomen reflexively, though there was nothing there yet, just possibility, just hope. The embryos waited in their frozen state, potential lives paused until we were ready to risk loving again, to embrace the exquisite vulnerability of parenthood with eyes fully open to its potential for both joy and heartbreak. 6 months stretched before me, of running the foundation, of healing my relationship with my family, of preparing mentally and physically for whatever came next. 6 months of growth and change and building something new from the ashes of what we'd lost. Outside, the rain began to ease, sunlight breaking through clouds to cast dappled patterns across the floor. Spring asserting itself after winter's long dominance, life persisting despite every reason to surrender. I thought of what Malcolm had said at the retreat. Grief doesn't end. It changes. It becomes part of you, woven into the fabric of who you are. The woman I was now, shaped by loving Carter, by losing him, by fighting to reclaim my place in my own story, was stronger than the woman I'd been before. Not despite the pain, but because of how I'd chosen to carry it. I opened my grandmother's locket, looking at the solemn baby who had been a family secret for generations. Then I closed it and fastened it around my neck, a tangible reminder of the choice I was making, to acknowledge loss openly, to allow it to transform rather than diminish me. On my desk, the Foundation's mission statement caught my eye. Honoring every child, supporting every family, finding purpose in our deepest pain. That was what we were doing, Malcolm and I. Finding purpose, creating meaning, transforming grief into action. And in 6 months, we would take another step together, toward possibility, toward the future, toward whatever life had waiting for us next. I placed my hand over the locket, feeling its weight against my skin. "Let's see what it feels like," I whispered, "to walk through fire and emerge not just surviving but fully, gloriously alive." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.